I was part of the first discovery of what used to be known as the Pergolesi Trio Sonata, and the first movement being used by Stravinsky in his Pulcinella Suite, and we always associated it with Pergolesi. And I happened to know the person who discovered in the library that it actually wasn't Pergolesi, it was Gallo.
Domenico Gallo's Trio Sonata in G major will be familiar to anyone who has heard Igor Stravinsky's music from the ballet Pulcinella. The melody from the opening of Stravinsky's Pulcinella Suite is lifted directly from the first movement of this chamber work. It should be noted, however, that at the time Stravinsky wrote Pulcinella, the authenticity of the source material was in dispute. Stravinsky misattributed the music to another Italian Baroque composer, Giovanni Battista Pergolesi.
In the old days, I mean, there was the manuscript, and then depending how famous the composer was and how often things would be performed and how frequently and how far it would stretch their performances, they would have copyists that would copy their parts. Mm-hmm. So that's when we sometimes had multiple parts in different, later on in libraries or monasteries or wherever they were stored. Well, and then sometimes you had the situation that the manuscript may not exist anymore, but like the first copy may. And you know how that is. It's like what you call this game in English, I think telephone, right? Yeah. That's what you call it. So by the time it gets to the fourth, fifth, whatever transcription, who knows what has been passed on, what was kind of mistake. So I suspect this is what might have happened.
As Klaus-Peter Diller notes in his preface to the 2007 edition of Gallo's Trio Sonatas, the invocation of Pergolesi's name here was a common tactic by music publishers in the 18th century. The work appears alongside other pieces allegedly connected to Pergolesi in a 1771 edition by the British music publisher Robert Bremner. Bremner likely intended to cash in on the posthumous fame of Pergolesi, who died several decades earlier in 1736.
And also, we shouldn't forget that we are living in a time of copyrights, we're living in a time of authenticity, and that wasn't quite so much the case there. I mean, there are compositions where Bach, took a Vivaldi tune and made it his piece and such, without referring to the composer. And that was pretty common at the time. Maybe it was a form of flattery, I don't know. Maybe it was a form of opportunism, I don't know.
I mean, I think it happens more frequently than we think, and there's probably still a lot of situations where there's been misrepresentation about who composed a certain piece.
What we do know about Domenico Gallo is that he was a well-respected Venetian violinist and composer. According to Francois-Joseph Fétis, the 19th century Belgian musicologist, Gallo primarily wrote music for the church. However, he also produced secular sonatas and symphonies of some renown. This particular trio sonata is taken from the first of two sets that Gallo published in 1750 and 1755, in Venice and London, respectively.
There is a personal side or sentimental side. Because when I grew up, the Pergolesi trio sonata was a piece I played very often with my dad. And so for me, it's just like a household piece. It's just a piece that I cannot not know. But I do realize that not necessarily the younger generation would know this. And for me, it was also like an opportunity to kind of correct history, to actually bring it to an understanding now there was somebody else behind that who we have forgotten and who may not have been so much worse to remember, but he did write that piece. And as a further little thing around this, my dad actually did the graphic art for the publishing of this print of this documentation. One of the traditions that we have created in the last 4 years with the ensemble is that we have the Christmas Baroque here in town and in 2 other cities outside, and that we try to include as many Magisterra fellows into this group. So again, like very intense on-the-job trainings, or how we these days say in academia, experiential learning. So it was a piece in my mind. I always thought, nobody, even to this day, it's 10, 15 years ago now, even to this day, people still don't know it. It's not Pergolesi. And So I thought this would be actually a cool piece to include into the Baroque concerts. And then as I thought further, I thought that's actually not a bad thing to do, because it would include the fellows into this process, how it works.
And so it's a way for them to receive direct feedback from more experienced players, while they're also producing something of a professional caliber in collaboration with professionals. Our Magisterra Fellows program, for instance, with the Baroque Christmas concert, we had, in my section, about 2 or 3 violinists that I was playing with, working with. My job was kind of to direct them, to say, like, this is what you should be doing right now. If we receive directions from the artistic director, this is how you mark it up in your part, this is what you need to be taking note of, these are things you can be thinking about for next rehearsal.
Because we had a lot of fellows involved in the project, it was great for us to spend the time and really dig deeper and try to understand the music on a deeper level without going into it in too much depth. Orchestral playing is a very different thing than chamber music playing. Taking on taking initiative and being proactive playing is sort of a different scenario than being in an orchestra where you're trying to blend and do what the conductor asks you to do. Right. So it's a different experience altogether. In
an orchestra, there's strength in numbers. You want to blend in, you want to be reliable. But in chamber music, you might be the only person on your part, or you might be 2 or 3 to a part, and you need to have full ownership of your musical intentions, and you need to be able to get on board with the musical intentions of whoever's sitting in the first violin chair, or whoever's the violist or cellist that you're playing with.
I wanted to make sure, and again, having the fellows in mind, that it's not everything in, I don't know, the violins and the violists don't get anything because they often just get long notes. I made difficult parts for each group, so they had to practice. So we have the 4 concerts in a row that you have to be ready for, short amount of time to prepare on a high level, and now we have this new layer of there's a piece that we perform in a way that's never been performed about, and this is how the working process happens around. How did the process start? Well, it started with agonizing for weeks. I'm totally honest about this. I'm not a composer. I'm not one of the performers who do this on a regular basis. So I have the ideas, but the actual physicality of sitting down and putting it in the software and having my brain go faster than my capacity and typing it in and correcting everything, that's the agonizing part. So I have to really take myself a block of time where I say, this is it. I focus on this for like 10 hours a day, because then my mind is in, and my memory of how all the commands for the software work and all of that stuff. And then there's always the fun part when the computer crashes and the software crashes. So there's that. I do have to say, though, I should not take complete credit on that, because I have reached out to a composer who of course is familiar with the software, so he has helped me formatting, and so we gave him some employment in that respect, and so I got some really good help with formatting and clearing things out. I have to say, in the Gallo, of course, it was as close to being a one-to-one transfer. I didn't really omit anything or add anything. In that particular situation, it was really rather what instruments are given what voice, and where do I want to hear a more bass-heavy place, or do I want to have more the melody come out, or do I want to have this coexist?
With the Gallo specifically, that one really required, you really had to be on at all times with that piece. It was written in such a way that every part had an equal imperative to be really, really precise in the articulation, in the lengths of the stroke, in the energy level, in holding the tempo. There was really no moment in that piece where you could stop thinking about what was coming next, and keeping and remaining incredibly attentive to the really fine details. And so that was something that I think our fellows really had to learn, and it was something that we really had to keep pushing them to do. There are professional contexts, playing in an orchestra, for instance, where you're not going to have someone pushing and prodding you at every moment to stay at the top level of energy. Whereas when you're in a small context, in a very small chamber orchestra, for instance, like we had for that concert, or I suppose you could say large chamber ensemble, you can't be passive. You don't have the option to just be to just coast along. And so I think with the Gallo specifically, that was our challenge as mentors and as musicians playing alongside those guys, that we needed to make sure that they understood that they had equal ownership to the concert master sitting in the front, and they had to be equally on as everybody else in there in order for the final product to be sizzling and elegant and energized.
There were instances where we made changes about the voicing and some notes, because I felt whatever I had set up and what we had rehearsed now didn't seem right. So even in the last minute before the concerts, we would still tweak here and there.
I believe Annetta Barber was fairly creative with how she constructed the orchestral voices, and we experimented with it. Some things changed throughout the process, and all of us were a part of that experience where we would try one of the variations, and then Annetta would kind of go, I don't know if that worked. Can you try this? Can you try that? Can you switch that articulation? Can you even try that pizzicato or whatever? And that kind of evolved to some extent. I mean, minor changes, but we were part of the creative process with making that transcription a successful one.
And that's part of the process. I mean, if we're going to give a convincing performance, we need to understand where this music came from, and why it was written, how it was written, who it was written for, all of those sorts of things.
I think that classical music has always been and will probably always continue to be both an entertainment and educational experience. And so I think necessarily it's entertaining, or it's at least providing you with a sentiment or an experience that you can't get elsewhere, but you're also learning. Right. Often we need to learn about the music we're about to listen to in order to fully appreciate it and fully engage with it.
Which is also, I think, where we become an educational institution, because we want the audience to also understand those things. I think understanding where music comes from and the context of it is crucial to connecting with it.
When you're working and you've got experience, I don't think that means you stop learning. Every project, no matter how simple or whether it's something you've played before, whether it's something that you've known since you were a kid, if you remain curious and if you remain interested in what you're doing, I don't think you stop learning new things about the repertoire, or new things about ensemble playing, new things about playing your instrument.
And it's a sort of a snowball effect, because once you start, then you maybe find something that you're interested in, and it's a rabbit hole you can keep researching and looking up, and it's never ending, right?
I think the times we're living in make it, I think, more and more obvious that when the arts are taken out of our lives, and that starts, of course, in education, what's left? And if there's like one place where you can ignite something, where they get exposed to something that they didn't even know they could like and be passionate about, I think then we have done our job.